Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining in from today. Welcome to another live episode at the Reactor. My name is Rav and I'm the program manager here at Reactor London. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We're all here to learn, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, and please be kind and considerate in the way you engage in the chat. We're back with our 10 Tuesdays to Azure Fundamentals episode. Today is episode 7. If you've missed the previous episodes, I will put in the link in the chat where you can find all the previous episodes. So just note this is the 7th episode. That means we have already finished our 6 episodes. You can always go back and view them. They'll be there on our Reactor YouTube channel. And with that, I am going to add Johan, who will lead the stream. And also in the middle of the session, he'll talk about the exam vouchers. So please stay put. Thanks. Hey, Johan.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. We're not ever sure where everyone's signing in from, but I hope you had a great day and a great week so far. Welcome to our 7th session around 10 Tuesdays to Azure Fundamentals. I'm pretty content that we're going to have a pretty good time here with regards to managing Azure costs. Cost is always top of mind for anyone when it comes to IT services and IT resources. It tends in bigger organizations to be a big part of your budget. So we will look at certain tools. Now you can use some of these tools to manage your costs inside of Azure. My name is Johan Meiberg, and welcome to our session here. I'm South African, as you can probably hear from my accent. In a previous role, I was a cloud solution architect at Microsoft in South Africa. I've been in the UK now for about just over a year, and I live just outside of London next to the Epping Forest, where, I really enjoy anything to do with water and getting that mountain bike as dirty as I can. I've got my social media up there as well, so you can link up with me on Twitter or on LinkedIn if you're interested. And I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, so we also do quite a bit of training for our customers. And with that, we will flip straight over into our content we're going to cover today. So we're going to spend some time around why cost management is important. I'm not sure if I have to really ask the question. If you need to ask the question, probably someone hasn't cracked the whip around you with regards to costs. But we will look at what different aspects of your Azure environment and other services might affect your costs. Then we will look at some tools that we've got available for you to use and for you to do some estimation. And then we will look at the cost management tool inside the Azure portal to allow you to set up things like alerts and things like budgets and these sort of things. So let's get straight into this. Why is costs important, right? It's pretty obvious why it should be important, right? If you're migrating from an on-premises environment into the cloud, cost is likely one of your core aspects that you're looking at, right? Typically, when we provision services on premises, we are looking at a big cost up front, and then the cost kind of gets, lower from there on. The minute you move into the cloud, we've pretty much got a pay-as-you-go type model, which implies that you don't pay a huge amount up front. You pay smaller amounts, but you pay on a more regular basis, right? So we're moving away from a CAPEX type payment style over to an OPEX type payment style, right? Capital expenditure versus operational expenditure. We spoke about this, I think, in day 2 or in our second episode. However, one of the things that does tend to happen with cloud resources, keep in mind though that you don't always have to follow the sort of processes that you need to follow when you are provisioning resources on-prem. So this implies that very often we sit with things like sprawl. Sprawl is that scenario where someone creates a virtual machine inside of the Azure environment. The virtual machine gets used for a demo of sorts. Someone forgets to disable and delete the virtual machine. Now the virtual machine is running, costing you money, and it's just sitting there actually doing nothing. 6 months down the line, you've got 3 or 4 different virtual machines, all that were used for a once-off demonstration purpose or something like that, for you to test something along those lines. And now you're paying for those 3 or 4 virtual machines, right? So the overall life cycle management of your resources, when are you provisioning, how are you provisioning, these things, you need to keep a tight sort of, keep a tight fist on these to understand when and why you are provisioning and when you want to remove some of those resources. In a perfect world, you want to use something like continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD type pipelines. So as you build, for example, applications, your application is deployed alongside your infrastructure with something like infrastructure as code, right? Think of things like Azure Resource Manager templates, those sort of things. So sprawl is one of our biggest issues, I reckon, in the cloud. And it's not just on the Azure side. I can think of something like Microsoft 365, where you create a new tenant and suddenly someone creates 20 teams, or they don't understand how you should be managing these environments, and they go and they create all these resources and none of them get used. So this is something that costs you money, that you want to tap down on. Fortunately for you, the agility of the cloud, and our customers, I mean now, the agility in the cloud forces companies like Microsoft to keep on innovating. And the reason why I'm saying that is, what happens when a customer is not getting value out of a service or a resource inside of Azure, the customer deletes it or removes it, right? They don't have to go and wait 6 months for something to add value, and if it doesn't add value, then reallocate the infrastructure and that sort of thing. Generally, we need to, from our side, make sure that we're constantly innovating, and that implies that the environment is constantly changing and getting better. And if you are not keeping tabs on that and how you can use your resources more effectively, you might be wasting money, right? So because the environment is constantly changing, we are constantly tweaking the platform and the environment and the entire stack, for that matter, trying to optimize so that our customers do save money. But if you don't adopt those new procedures and those new types of services and the new mechanisms that Microsoft is building and into the platform, you might also end up paying what the customers were paying maybe a year or two ago, right? So cost is a key aspect here. Also, when you're looking at multi-cloud, so we also, of course, have some customers that don't want all the eggs in a single basket. They might want to use something like AWS alongside Azure to provision some resources in one cloud provider and other resources in another cloud provider. And to that end, you also might want to look at the cost across those cloud providers, and Azure can do that for you, right? We can create a connector to your environment inside of AWS, and we can pull those costs through so you can see what everything is costing you across multiple providers. And I've already spoken about the OPEX cost, but more importantly, because you're talking about operational expense that might get paid on a monthly basis, very often it's under the radar, right? If you're doing a capex type infrastructure where there's a large amount up front, obviously everyone's eyes is on those large amounts and they know what's going into a project. But the minute you move into a cloud model where you've got an operational expense that just gets deducted on a monthly basis, sometimes the cost is difficult to quantify and to see, but hang on for a second, we are spending 2-3 times more than what we thought we were going to spend, right? And those are the things you'd want to keep tabs on. I'll give you another example here, and this is kind of where consistency is key, right? You don't want your resources to be deployed by a person sitting in the Azure portal, for example, provisioning resources, right? What's going to happen in those instances is the person is one day going to click on, this access tier must be hot for the storage account, and the next day, for some reason, they click it must be cold. And that has a cost implication, right? So consistency is the key, and to that end, infrastructure as code will help you to keep that consistency. But something small like the access tier of a storage account can have a massive impact on your storage, right? Obviously, the hot tier is going to be a little bit more expensive for the storage, but a little bit cheaper in terms of getting your data out. Whereas the cool tier will be cheaper for the storage, but will cost a little bit more to get your data out, right? So something small like that can have a massive impact. And if you're not consistent in the way that you deploy certain resources, you might run into some problems. Another example towards the bottom here is your virtual machines, where you've got the virtual machine sizes, and you can see there that, just something small, if someone was using the portal, a drop down where they select size, they just select the wrong one, they don't notice what they are doing, and suddenly your virtual machine costs you 2 or 3 times more than what it should be costing you, right? So this is why costing is so important. Traditionally, when we were provisioning infrastructure on premises, these mistakes were not typically made. And if they were made, we quickly realized that these mistakes were made, right? In the cloud, it's a little bit less transparent in a sense if you're not managing infrastructure well, right? So you want to keep constant taps and monitoring going to understand what is happening, why it's happening, and are we following that life cycle of what we thought we were going to be deploying in the right way. So let's take a look here at what affects your costs, right? So of course there are many things that will affect your costs, right? I did a demo towards the beginning of this series where I showed you that I can provision some virtual machines in 2 locations, and we looked at the different cost options there. I will do that demo again today, but there's a whole array of things that can affect your cost. If you look on the right hand side here, you will see that things like, the resource type. So the difference between provisioning a virtual machine and the difference between provisioning an app service versus provisioning a Kubernetes cluster might be vast for running a single web application, right? All of those can kind of get you the same result at the end of the day, but the cost for those types of services and resources might be completely different. Now, if you think about a virtual machine, it's going to, you might need some additional resources to get multiple apps running on the same virtual machine. App services will give you that scale automatically without you having to do anything from your side. It includes a load balancer, for example. If you look at something like Kubernetes also includes a load balancer, right? And it scales in and out, it scales up and down, it scales almost in all directions, right? It's almost difficult to make a Kubernetes cluster not scale. So the type of resource and your migration journey into the cloud is really important, and choosing the SKU alongside your resource is critical, right? And I think I'll show you this just quickly. Let me just pop open a browser if it's all the same to you. I'm going to go for app services here. I hope everyone can see my screen. There's app service plans. And if I create a new app service plan, let me just bump my font slightly, and I scroll down, then you will see that there's my existing plans, right? These are the plans that I can choose from in that given region. Now, all of this is still in South African Rand, so apologies for that. But you'll see there's the basic plan is about 220 South African Rand per month. That, by the way, I think is probably about $25 per month for that matter, right? Moving from that into the premium V3 plan, you're talking about 5,000 Rand, right? Which is significantly more. Now, if you have a rookie that's busy provisioning these resources and they are in a hurry, it's very easy to click on the wrong one here, right? So you don't want to leave it up to an individual to make the choice about this. Preferably, you want to embed these things into a script and use something like infrastructure as code for your deployments. So something small like this can make a massive, massive difference. So the resource type, of course, is important. Then again, your applications might not be 100% ready for running cloud native, which means you might have some web applications that just as an example, have some dependencies on the operating system. Maybe in your organization you've built a Windows service that runs on the host, and your web application talks to that service. You'll only be able to deploy that onto a virtual machine in Azure, right? You won't be able to deploy that onto our app services because you don't have access to the operating system at that level. So you might have to re-engineer and re-architect your solution a little bit before it runs in application services. And that might force your hand to first migrate your virtual machines, fix the application so it's more cloud native, and after that migrate over to app service plans and app services for that matter. So this is something to just be cognizant of. You cannot always have your cake and eat it. You must sometimes make some changes to the way you're operating in order to get your systems to run in the optimal cloud first environment. Of course, we've also got things like consumption. Certain services, are consumption based. I'll give you a quick example of that as well. If I go for a function app here, and I create a new function app, you will see that if I go for hosting here, you will see, well, not there actually. Oh, there we go. It's loaded now. There you can see I can either go for functions premium plan, or I can go for an app service plan, or I can go for consumption, serverless. In other words, you're just going to be paying for what you are using. It's important to understand that there's going to obviously be some sort of a threshold here where if you're really hammering the function application, that at a certain point, it makes sense to go over to an app service plan, which has actually got, a specific cost. And let's just see, I might be able to look at, to find costing here. No, I don't have an option for that now. I'm not going to go look for it. But the point is, certain services can be provisioned with a fixed cost. Certain services can be provisioned with a consumption-based model. And if you're using that consumption-based model, make sure that that whatever you are running in that instance is actually suited for the consumption model. Consumption model is not ideal for everything. It's not the go-to for any type of service if you think about it in that sense, right? You want to ensure, for example, that you know what that threshold is so that you don't end up in a scenario where you're paying, £2,000 a month for the consumption, plan, but the actual premium plan costs you £1,000 a month, just as an example, right? So just be mindful of that sort of thing, because something like that can actually, there'll be a threshold, and the minute it tips over that, using a consumption plan might not actually make sense. Even though at the onset you're thinking, well, this is a no-brainer, we're not going to use the service much, let's go for a consumption plan and just pay for what we are using, right? If it's being hammered, you might want to opt for the other option. I've already spoken about the maintenance and overall life cycle of the different services. This is also a crucial part of your cost management. Think of your production environment that needs to be running 24/7, right? You want to take a different approach there to your dev environment, which is typically only being used maybe from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So for those virtual machines, for example, you want to disable those virtual machines overnight. You want to stop those virtual machines and deallocate them overnight, so that in the morning, all the developers have to do is to start the virtual machines when they start using them again, right? You can automate that, of course, but the point is not everything needs to be running 24/7, right? If you're only doing UAT testing once a month, just bring up the UAT environment once a month when it's necessary to use it. If you are deploying something like app services, which you are paying for, whether you are using them or not, and it's in a dev and test environment, it's probably worth removing the resources in the evening automatically with a script and re-provisioning it again in the morning, right? So that you don't pay for the sort of 12, 13 hours overnight that the services are just standing there doing nothing. So horses for courses here. Certain resources need to be running all the time, but not all resources need to be up and running all the time. Be mindful of that and treat them in that way. Of course, we've also got the region, the geography. This, I think, is a bit of a no-brainer in a sense. Certain services are going to cost more in certain locations. The best example of this is South Africa, probably, because in South Africa, we've got two regions. We've got South Africa North, which is Johannesburg, and we've got Cape Town, South Africa West. Cape Town is not as going to be as cheap as Johannesburg, right? Johannesburg is the economic hub for South Africa. There's a lot more service providers there. There's a lot more happening. Our GDP essentially turns around Johannesburg, right? So Cape Town, inherently from an Azure perspective, will be more expensive than Johannesburg. In fact, probably around 8 to 12% more expensive than Johannesburg. Now, it's one thing if your resources need to run in a certain region and the latency outside of that region is maybe too much for you. It's a whole different ballgame if you don't have that compliance requirements that you can say, well, we are just going to choose the cheapest region close enough to our users and run it like that. In certain instances, the region and the geography might also talk to your governance and compliance requirements. For example, if you think of, data residency issues that you might have, you might be a bank, and the governance and compliance requirements in your country might require all of your data to be stored within the borders of the country. These sort of things might affect your choices with regards to regions and will eventually override the cost implication of being able to store your data in a country that's much cheaper than what your country is in terms of storing the data there. So again, that's also one of these things. And I'll demo some of this for you in a minute as well. Of course, we've got things like ingress, egress, network traffic, certain things you pay for, certain things you're not going to pay for, right? If you think, for example, of our Azure backup services, there's not going to be a cost for aspects of that like you have for the costs of a storage account, just as an example. There's an egress cost for our storage accounts. You're not going to have that cost if you're using Azure for backup purposes, just as an example. So that also adds up from the costing perspective and is something that you need to be mindful of. Of course, what you might find is with things like, with our storage account, we've got the ability to distribute and cache our static content globally. That is going to cost more than, storing the content in a central location, right? So again, horses for courses here. Understand what your requirement is and build your infrastructure accordingly. Don't just assume that because we are provisioning these resources in this way, that we are also going to provision these other resources in exactly the same way, right? Do a little bit more sort of planning up front and understand exactly what the requirements are and deploy the resources exactly as the way you want them to be deployed. And then also, subscription type. I don't think this is such a big deal, to be honest with you. The subscription type is not going to affect your costing, except if you've got, for example, something like the free Azure account, right? You can go and sign up for a free Azure account. It's going to give you certain resources for free for a period of time. It's going to, I think something like $100 worth of credit or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But then there's also going to be free services for a year that will stay free for that year period, right? But I'm not really aware of any other types of subscription types that you might find that's going to give you a discount, except if you are an enterprise Microsoft customer and you've got what's known as the EA agreement, right? With an EA agreement, every 3 years, you will get to negotiate with Microsoft what your spend was, what your spend is going to be, and that's something that you can kind of renegotiate with Microsoft every 3 years, right? And of course, depending on what that negotiation comes up with, you might actually save some costs and when you negotiate directly with Microsoft. So the subscription type, it just depends on the type of relationship you have with Microsoft, to be honest. If you're an individual, the free Azure account is going to give you some free services for a year. In fact, if you look at the free Azure account, certain services are just free for even past that 1 year period. And then there's also a marketplace, and I think this is probably quite important and usually overlooked in a big way. Just because we've got a service inside of Azure doesn't mean that our third parties and partners of ours don't have a similar service inside of Azure. What do I mean by that? Well, think, for example, of firewall technology that you might have employed on premises. You've deployed this firewall technology in your organization. It's set up correctly, you've got licensing, and the third-party provider gives you the ability to bring your own license into the cloud, right? So as opposed to going for the Azure firewall, you might be able to take that license from your on-prem environment and bring that license for the firewall provider into Azure and run that firewall as a service inside of Azure, right? So make sure that you are not missing out on opportunities like that and not buying something that you've already paid for. And the marketplace is packed with different third-party providers and other services and other technology companies that build their services specifically for Azure, right? So you can do a lot worse than go and search the Azure marketplace for a service that you're already using. You're already on top of the technology, how it works. You maybe already have a license. You might be able to bring that license into the cloud. So make sure that that option is not there and you're not using it because you are not aware of it, right? So I think that's, these are all the aspects of this that you might be cognizant of. I would also want to mention, the need for you to continue to monitor your resources. I cannot stress this enough. If you've got a virtual machine inside of Azure and the virtual machine is busy sort of operating at 30% CPU time, right? So let me just quickly graph this out. If that's 50 there in the middle, and that is 100%, and that's sort of 30% over there. If your CPU is doing this sort of spiking into the 50s, you are probably overspec the virtual machine. So what you want to do is change the size of the virtual machine so that it operates around there, right? Otherwise, you're paying for a workload and you're not using all the resources. Now, of course, you want to make sure that you get this right, but fortunately, if you end up seeing that it does spike to a point where it flatlines, then maybe pipe it down a little bit, right? Maybe choose something in between that runs your load at that level there. But you're not going to know about this if you're not constantly monitoring your resources. So constantly monitoring your resources, getting alerts, and we'll talk about alerts in the next couple of weeks. Get alerts when certain conditions are met. If the CPU is going over 30% or over 90% for X amount of time, you know that you've underspected. If it's constantly under 30% for long periods of time, you've overspected, right? So monitoring is your friend here, and monitoring will give you a good insight into how are these things running, and have you chosen the wrong resource type? Have you chosen the wrong SKU on that resource type? And can you resize it, right? So this is baked into our platform, and we'll take a look at monitor in some detail a bit later. I've got, as you've probably become accustomed to over the last couple of weeks, if you have been attending some of these sessions, and you manage to scan the barcode, it'll take you to a form where you can type in that code 17968. I'm not sure, maybe Rav can put it onto the chat as well. It might be worth doing that for the folks that don't have a pen and paper to write it down quickly. But you can use this event ID on that form. Of the last 7 sessions, if you attend 5 of those sessions, then you'll be eligible for 50% off an exam voucher for the Azure Fundamentals. So make use of this offer. It's it's going to save you quite a bit of money if your organization is not paying for your exams. But we are offering this as a sort of limited sort of time during our 10 Tuesday sessions. So make use of this. That event code 17968. Scan the barcode, and it'll take you to a form where you can give some details. We will make sure that we always stay compliant with regards to your personal details, and we will remove whatever personal details there are there. However we need to do that. Okay, so I hope as many of you as possible can actually do that. Just maybe a last point on this, very important. These 10 Tuesday sessions are not deep dives technology-wise. That's not why we are doing them. The 10 Tuesdays is focused on a certification, right? And a certification exam, really. So what we are trying to achieve here is not deep dive into the technology. What we are trying to achieve here is we are trying to give you tools to get certified. And that's what these 10 Tuesdays are all about, getting you certified, and hence the exam discount vouchers. All right, I hope that makes sense and that you've actually marked that up. All right, so of course, we've got some tools as well that will assist you with regards to this. The first one is the pricing calculator. Now, as far as the exam is concerned, they would want to make sure that you know what the differences are between these two tools. First of all, we've got the pricing calculator, right? The pricing calculator is going to give you an estimate of what the resource will cost on a monthly basis, right? So the pricing calculator will say, you want 1,000 virtual machines in this region. This is the hardware spec. This is what it's going to cost you at the end of the day, right? So that's what the pricing calculator is for. The total cost of ownership calculator, you'll see, is completely different. The total cost of ownership calculator is going to compare and show you the differences on provisioning infrastructure on premises and provisioning that infrastructure in the cloud with a provider like Microsoft, like in Azure, just as an example. So then you'll see the comparison of that and what your ongoing cost is on premises to manage that infrastructure versus what your ongoing cost is in the cloud to manage that infrastructure. So just from an exam perspective, be mindful of these two calculators. They will try to catch you out to make sure you understand what the difference is between the pricing and the total cost of ownership calculator is. I'm going to quickly demo these for you if it's all the same to you. All right, so what I've got here is I've got the pricing calculator, right? You'll notice that everything in our cloud platform is available here, right? Everything from compute, web applications, AI and machine learning, right? You want to Azure bot service. What is that going to cost you? You want to run some IoT workloads. There's the IoT hub, right? We will tell you what that cost is going to be. Azure functions, etc. Right? So if I go for featured here, you'll see one of these options is virtual machines. I can click on virtual machines. And if I scroll down just a section here, I should probably not scroll. I should just use the page down. But you can see there that I can actually go and specify the region. Let's make this 1,000 virtual machines, right? And you'll see from this that my cost for 1,000 virtual machines is $152,000 average per month. That's not the actual cost. It might cost a little bit more. It might cost a little bit less. But that's an estimate of what it'll cost you for that specific virtual machine size, right? So if I change this and I scroll all the way to the bottom here and I say South Africa West, take a look at what the cost is now, $183,000, right? So moving them from the US into South Africa West has escalated my costs by about, what's that, sort of 14 odd % or something like that. All right. So that's why we said earlier on the slides, the region that you provision your resources in is really, really important. And you don't just want, you want to make sure that if you provision the resources in a specific region, that there's a reason for provisioning the resources in a specific region. And that might be something like, compliance, data residency, all of those governance type issues. So what I'm going to do here is I specified 1,000 virtual machines in South Africa West, and you'll see that the cost comes to $183,000. Now, I also happen to know that we've got a region called South Africa North, and if I change to South Africa North and scroll down, it brings my cost down to $159,000 per month, right? That's already like a 26, 27, sort of 30,000 rand, dollar saving per month, just by changing the region from Cape Town to Johannesburg. That's significant. It might not sound significant now for you, but you ask your organization's accountant, and this will make them sit up and ask questions like, why do we need to provision these resources in Cape Town if we can get a significant saving by provisioning in Johannesburg? On top of this, as you might know, Microsoft is putting in a lot of effort to make sure that our software runs on multiple platforms. The .NET framework already runs on Windows as well as Linux. Things like PowerShell already runs on Windows as well as on Linux. So the days of you having to provision your, for example, .NET applications on Windows is almost gone, right? It might be that you're still using an old version of the .NET framework, for example, and that might force you onto Windows. But if you're running anything from the .NET 3.1 core upwards, .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET 7, anything like that, you can deploy those applications on Linux if you wanted to, right? So there you can see if I choose Linux and scroll down, it brings my cost down to $92,000 per month. That's already half of what I paid for in Cape Town running on Windows. So this cost that you see here, of course, includes the license for Windows if I was running Windows, right? And talking about that, you'll also notice that we've got some options here with regards to either doing a pay-as-you-go option, and then we've got a savings plan, and we've also got reserved instances. The key difference here is you'll notice with a savings plan, we are not bound to a specific size virtual machine. We are not typically bound to a region or to virtual machines for that matter. With a savings plan, you are saying to Microsoft that I'm planning to run these workloads for 1 year or 3 years at least, and we will give you some discount to that end. With reserved instances, it's a little bit tighter, and you're saying that it's going to be a very specific virtual machine size in a specific region, right? And it only typically applies to virtual machines that I'm aware of. But you can see here that if I go and specify 3 years reserved, then essentially it's bringing my cost down to $101,000 per month, and that is with the Windows licenses. On top of that, I can specify the hybrid benefit. And with the hybrid benefit, what we're saying is, if you've already paid for your Windows license and you are migrating those workloads into the cloud, why not decommission the servers on premises when you've done the migration, right? You've already paid for those Windows Server licenses. So if you have those Windows Server licenses, you might as well bring those licenses, and that brings my cost down to $34,000 per month for exactly the same workload, 1,000 virtual machines, same size. I brought the cost down from $180,000 per month to $34,000 per month by just tweaking the way that I'm planning to deploy this infrastructure. All right. Now, if you're getting this wrong for 1 year, you are spending $180,000 over 12 months per month getting the price wrong. So that's why costing is so important, right? You're paying this on a monthly basis. You want to make sure that you are paying the absolute minimum, and that is your rolling price going forward. All right, so this is the pricing calculator, rather, sorry, and you'll see that we've also got things like app services in here. I can scroll down a bit, and you'll see that there's my app service, West US. There's the the type of plan that I'm selecting. You can see that I'm saying that I can have 10 instances in the cluster. It's going to cost me $1,000 a month, just as an example for that. Right? You can also see that there's some support included and not included, and whatever the case might be. So the costing calculator, or the pricing calculator rather, is going to tell you what the estimate is of what you'll be paying inside the cloud. Contrast that with the total cost of ownership calculator, and you can see here, estimate the cost savings by migrating to Azure. This is the difference that you'll be paying to run your infrastructure versus what you'll be paying us to run your infrastructure. Right? That's really what the TCO calculator is for. So you can see here that I might actually go and specify that I've got 100 virtual machines. They are, I'm virtualizing them with VMware or Hyper-V, however I might be doing that. Most of them are Windows. You will see that they might be physical servers, might be virtual machines, 4 cores. I can actually go and add to this if I wanted to. So this is for SAP, for my CRM workload if I wanted to. There's some databases. There's some storage costs that I might be having on premises. I can go and add some additional storage, right? Maybe, sort of 10 terabytes worth of capacity for that. And then also some networking, right? How much networking do you require, right? We're gonna have, overall, the bandwidth that we consume in our on-prem environment is going to be 1 terabyte over a period of time. I can then go next. I can make some adjustments. I can specify that I've got, Windows software assurance coverage for SQL. I can specify that I've got some geo-redundant storage that are requirements, etc. I can specify some additional costs for my IT labor. There's also some other options here, like electricity costs. What are my power ratings for the CPUs, etc.? What are my data center costs, right? For the different racks I might have. And then if I hit the next button, what we will do is we will come up with an estimate and tell you, and you can see here that my on-premises cost for that workload is going to be this much. And this is how the cost will essentially keep on going up. And this is what the same workload will generally cost inside of Azure, and that is how that workload will go up over time, right? So you can see here how the cost essentially is different from what you might be running this infrastructure yourself versus running the infrastructure in the cloud in something like Azure. On top of that, and this is not something I have in the slides, it's actually not part of the exam, but I thought I would actually show this to you in any event. We've actually got an emissions dashboard, right? And you can extrapolate this using Power BI from your Azure environment. It's actually just a few clicks. All you have to do is you have to go and look at this emissions impact dashboard. This is actually an app that you can add into your Power BI environment. And it'll then essentially give you a dashboard of what your carbon emissions is in Azure right now. So this is something that's very important for most organizations. And you can then go and sort of ring fence certain services. There you can see I can look at a specific subscription, right? I can look at my subscription number 4, for example, and it shows me my total usage. It shows me my carbon emissions. It shows me my carbon intensity. I can go look at my emission savings, right? There's a whole bunch of different reports here. And we also show you the calculation methodology of how we calculate this, and it shows you what your footprint is. This is important because you might have actually had some studies done on premises to understand what your carbon footprint is, right? Moving to the cloud might be one of the reasons why you are moving towards the cloud, is to reduce your emissions, right? So to this end, we actually provide you with the actual data that drives this dashboard and this, This is bogus data right now that I'm seeing right now, but it's possible to hook it up with your Azure environment. And we've gone and done the math, and we will show you what that impact is. And then we've got, we've got something else here as well called tags. Now, I'm not sure if you remember this, but, and in fact, tags are also free, by the way. We spoke at the beginning of these sessions, we spoke about the Azure structure. We had a couple of things. We had management groups, we had subscriptions, and we had resource groups, right? Management groups provided me with 6 layers of structure that I can create. And then I place my subscription strategically around that structure. And then my resource groups sit inside the subscription. That allows me to model my business in a sense, right? So think about it like this. If I've got, the root management group, and there I've got something like sales, just as an example, and I've got something like IT, and inside sales, I've got subscription 1 and subscription 2, just as an example. And inside of IT, I might have 3 subscriptions, subscription 3, subscription 4, subscription 5, right? And then, of course, inside these subscriptions, I've got resource groups, right? And those resource groups are where the resources actually live. So it's really just a hierarchical structure, or a taxonomy as it's actually officially known, right? So we've got the structure, and my resources kind of hang on off the bottom of that. Now, you might be saying, well, this is great because I can, if I change my color here, I can go and look at what these 2 subscriptions cost me, and I can bill that back to the sales department, right? And I can go and look at what these 3 subscriptions cost me, and I can bill that to the IT department. The IT department are usually the folks that bill this back to business, right? So if it was something like marketing as an example, then you might be billing it back to marketing. But what if I don't model my organization using these structures? What if I've got some stakeholders that are responsible for running workloads, and I've got a structure here, but my costing does not adhere to this structure, or my organizational structure changes so often that this model does not represent my business? Well, you can use something called tags, and I can then go and decide that resource, that resource, that resource, and that resource across 4 different subscriptions belongs to this owner. And then I can actually go and draw some reports to understand what is the costing for owner number 1, what is the costing for owner number 2. This is the capability that we're giving to you inside of Azure that allows me to tag my resources, right? And let me just show this to you. Let me just find my Azure portal here. So you can see here, just as an example, I can go for my function apps, for example. And when I create a new function app, if I scroll to the right here, there's some tags, right? And I can go and use these tags to go and specify what exactly, who this belongs to. So I might go and add something there called owner, and I can say that the owner is marketing, just as an example. I can use these tags to ignore that structure and group together or segregate different resources based on my terminology and my own taxonomy completely, right? So it's probably more of a folksonomy, if I have to become technical, than it is a taxonomy. But the point is, if I go for my tags here, you will see that we can go and create reports. As you can see towards the bottom here, I want to go and see all the resources that belong to marketing. I want to see all the resources that belong to cost center 008, just as an example, right? And I can go and click on cost center 008, and these are all the resources that belong to that. If I click on the owner marketing, these are all the resources. Right now, it's all the same resources because I've tagged everything with that owner and that cost center, but nothing is stopping me from ignoring the structure as a whole and specifying that these resources belong to this cost center and these resources belong to that cost center. So resource tags is a great way for you to group together or segregate certain resources that are in the structure in a way that makes sense to you logically if you wanted to do things like bill back to your different business units, just as an example, right? So then your structure doesn't matter. Your tagging will allow you to group together the resources and allow you to flesh out your costing properly. And then last but not least, we've got a cost management tool. I need to probably flip over to my personal account for this. If I go into my cost management tool here, you will see that we've got this tool called cost management. And in cost management, we've got a cost analysis option. I'll just bump the font up a little bit. And you will see that if I go and specify, for maybe the last 12 months, might actually be easier to do this from here. All right, this is actually on my Microsoft tenant, on my actual subscription inside of Microsoft, and I've just got some data here, so let me rather show it from here. So there you can see I can go and specify over the last 12 months, and it's showing me, what did my different services cost me? So my virtual machines was that amount there. My app services, that's what that cost me. My API management service, which is not cheap, that's what that cost. Cognitive search, event hubs, right? Container registry, all sorts of others. I can go and pivot this based on the location, right? What are all my resources costing in the UK? If you're a global organization and you've got 7 or 8 different regions, you want to go and allocate the cost per region, right? And I can go and drill down and say, only show me the cost in the UK, and it'll roll the cost up in the UK. And there you'll see that the virtual machines there are significantly more expensive, right? And then I can also, if I use my resource groups in a certain way, or I can actually go and specify anything like this, right? The pricing model, the part number, the charge type, right? Or the resource type, the service tier for that matter. And it'll actually go and show this to me. There you can see there is the different service tiers. So you can actually go and pivot this information to your heart's content. We've got an API in this, so you can access this information programmatically as well. And you'll see that we've even got some connectors for AWS there, right? So you can actually create a connector to AWS. You can bring in and roll all your costs in here without any issues. We've also got something called budgets. And budgets essentially allow me to go and add a budget to specify that we've got a monthly budget, for example, for our UAT environment, right? And the UAT environment is only going to spend, say, $500 a month. And then I can go and set my different thresholds, right? Well, this is that's my threshold. If I hit the next button here, you'll notice that I can actually go and if the actual percentage is over 80%, start sending me a notification around that. So we can decide based on historic data, we can actually go and look at what we are currently paying, what the forecast is, and we can start getting alerts to understand, but hang on for a second, you're halfway through the month and you've already hit your threshold. So you're going to go way over your allocated spend for the month. Now, something like this might not stop your resources from running. It's just an alert to keep you in touch with what's happening on the ground and what that actual spend is. I think there's one more thing that I want to maybe just mention. Cost alerts. That's right. So you can see that I can add an anomaly alert. There's 2 types of alert. There's a budget alert and anomaly alert. And the anomaly alert is essentially going to show me that where my cost tends to be $1,000 a month or whatever the case, suddenly this month it's $3,000, right? There's a spike in the usage. I might not have budgets. Anomaly alerts will essentially allow me to look at when something is happening that we are not expecting, that we also want to receive that alert. right? So there's a couple of things you can do to that end. And that essentially brings me up to the end of our session here. We looked at cost management and in the billing. We looked at the budgets. We looked at those alerts. And just to summarize things, it's very easy to get your deployments just wrong. Just a slight sort of mistake in your deployments can cost you a lot more money than what you want to be spending, right? So make sure that you're consistent with your deployments. Look at the different factors that can affect the cost. Use these factors to your own advantage, and then use the necessary tools, right? Use things like tagging, use the pricing calculator, use all of these tools so that you understand and try to know what the costing is going to be. And then if it's not the same, try to understand why it's different. There might be a reason why it's different. It might be that you just need to sort of change the way you think about certain things. And then we've got budgets, we've got alerts inside the portal, all of those things. And that kind of brings me to the end of this costing session. I hope that was valuable to you. Let's see if there are a couple of questions.
Hey, Johan. So we've got a question from Vic.
Hi.
Do users get a preview of all costs totaled before provisioning their infra?
No. So the closest you will get to that is the Azure, the cost calculator, right? The cost calculator will give you an indication of what that cost will be. You're not going to get there's nothing inside of the Azure environment that will estimate what the cost is going to be. The Azure Cost Calculator will do that. So that is what that tool is for.
Then the next question is, does the pricing calculator automatically tweak those parameters for us to shoot for absolute minimum cost, or do we have to handle that and learn as we go?
No, so that's actually a really good question, right? So no, it doesn't go for the lowest cost. I actually don't know what the default values are. And in actual fact, we can probably look at that quickly. I would like to see. So let's go for the pricing calculator. I think what we are likely doing here is we are just taking, some of the services that are deployed the most, right? So an average sort of virtual machine. Look at this virtual machine. 2 virtual CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, all right? So no, the pricing calculator is not going to default to the lowest possible way, because the Azure portal doesn't default to the lowest possible way. The lowest cost is not necessarily the most secure cost. The lowest cost is not necessarily the cost that gives you the highest availability, right? So we are trying to give you a balanced sort of view on what you are most likely to deploy, and you need to tweak it from there. So you should not look at it from that angle. You should look at it from your perspective to understand what are your requirements, and then look at the costing calculator and tweak, the parameters according to your requirements. So, for example, you might say that, well, we need 4 cores with 7 gigs of RAM, just as an example. That's going to make these changes to the cost. But yes, we don't need Windows. We can run these off Linux. They are also not going to be running for 730 hours, which is essentially the whole month, right? So you might say we're only planning to run them for 500 hours. So to come back to the question, I think we are giving you a very average sort of view on all of these services, not too high, not too low, just something roughly in the middle, so that it's you don't get a surprise at the end of each day. I hope that answers that question, Vic. Ladies and gents, if I don't answer the question properly, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or on the other media that I also mentioned. I'm more than happy to have a discussion with you there. It's not a problem for me. Any other questions? I hope that made sense.
Yeah, that's it, Johan. No more questions in the chat.
Okay, cool. I see there is one more question there. Our monthly spend goes up month on month as the environment grows. Any advice on setting budgets when this happens? Yes. So that's difficult, right? The more resources you provision, of course, the more your spend is going to go up, right? But it's up to you to go and understand what resources are being deployed. And if your organization is very big and your management is quite granular in that sense, different departments might be provisioning resources and services that you're not even aware of, right? So overall, my recommendation, Dan, and I know this is maybe not what you want to hear, but I've seen this work quite effectively, is to create, almost like a center of excellence in your organization. This is going to do a couple of things. It's going to get your skills up. It's going to get all the people with the knowledge together so you can start sharing the knowledge internally. But you're going to start getting a much bigger picture of what is being deployed and how it's being deployed. And that will show you which of these resources that are being deployed are not deployed in the same way that you're planning for them to be deployed. For example, if your standard in your organization from a governance perspective is to deploy all web servers with 4 CPUs and 7 gigs of RAM, just as an example, and you're deploying an additional 2 servers this month, it's very simple to go and adjust that budget to allocate for the new 2 virtual machines, right? Then the budget should not, then the question should not even arise, because you know what the size is, right? The problem comes in when someone is provisioning something and they use their own sizes for virtual machines, because then suddenly your prediction and what the actual growth in terms of cost is not the same thing. And then your budget is going to have an issue, right? So make sure that some of these things just funnel through the same group of people in your organization to understand. But hang on, use something like Azure policies to make sure that no one can provision virtual machines in this subscription that has got more than 4 CPUs and 7 gigs of RAM. Policies will ensure that you are consistent, and we will talk about policies before the end of these sessions. I think next week or the week after that. So there are a couple of ways to do that. I hope that made sense. Okay, cool. We've gone 3 minutes over. I apologize for that. Anyway, please reach out to me if you have any further questions. Thank you very much from my side. It's been great as usual. Thank you, Rav, for your assistance as per usual. And I hope you have learned a couple of things and you have a great evening or day or morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Johan. And we will see you all next week, same time on Tuesday for the next session.
Cool bananas.